Hello, I'm Michael Lupman and chair of our Think House sessions. And today I'm speaking to Sally Mewis, who's head of our IT team, about cloud computing and outsourcing. So, Sally, when I was much younger, a cloud was something that floated around in the sky and dropped rain. Now, these days, everybody seems to be uploading stuff to clouds. What is the difference between clouds and outsourcing?
Well, I think that's one of the interesting points that we want to explore, actually, because I think we felt that certainly in terms of IT outsourcing, we'd hit a little bit of a crossroads where we were seeing much less bigger IT outsourcing deals coming across our desk and much more people utilising cloud-based services. And one of the challenges for them is understanding the risks that are associated with those cloud-based services. There's certainly a perception that cloud is much cheaper than traditional IT outsourcing, but there still is a fear, I think it's fair to say, around what will happen if I use a cloud service. I don't really understand what it is.
Oh, you've raised the very question I wanted to ask, which is, what are cloud services?
Well, cloud services are essentially actually IT outsourcing. I think it's quite interesting to think back when I was doing some of the very first big IT outsourcing agreements, which was probably around the late 80s, early 90s. It was really all about the IT staying where it was and the people going. What's really interesting about cloud is the people stay and the IT goes. And I think if you think about cloud-based services as being off-premise, so in a funny sort of way they are like IT outsourcing, but you are accessing a platform, technology, functionality in software, but you're doing it off-premise, so it's located away from your main building, and you access that through some kind of internet or web browser. And because you can't see it, I think sometimes, and because it's complex technology, I think sometimes people feel a bit scared about what am I letting myself in for.
Right, so you've described what cloud services are. What are the pros and cons of cloud services versus outsourcing?
Well, I think it probably comes down to control, actually, in terms of a big pro and con, in the sense that with the traditional outsourcing model, you have a lot more control over how the service is delivered, what the subcontractor stack looks like under that service provider, what service levels are designed to support your business. There's a lot more control in those kinds of contracts, and that's of course why there's a high cost to entry and why they take longer to negotiate. Contrast that with cloud, where it's much more buyers seen, in the sense that there is already a service constituted. It has a pre-printed specification. You're almost checking whether that's the service you want, and then you'll plug and play into that service. So you have much less control about how the technology that supports the service evolves, the service level regime that supports the service. All of that is kind of already there, and you have to take it or leave it, which is why, of course, we have much shorter contracts, much less negotiation around a cloud agreement. There are other issues, I think, around risk. The risks are different. Again, with the cloud, the traditional model, you have more control, you can manage risk, you've got more opportunity to step in if you don't like the way things are doing, you've got opportunity to do change control through a traditional model, which might alter the way the service is being delivered. Again, on a cloud-based model, you have less of that. And of course, the big issue around cloud is people being concerned about security of data, because you're putting your data into an unknown environment. You don't really understand necessarily technologically how that works, and therefore there's some fear that you might lose that control. You could argue it's the same in a traditional outsourcing model, because you're still handing over information and data to a third party, and they're probably not on premise, so they're probably not sitting next to you when they're using and processing that. But because you've got kind of a closer relationship, I guess, with a traditional outsourcing partner, and more maybe daily interaction, it doesn't feel quite as risky. Big issue, of course, around cost, because on the traditional model, whilst the early days of outsourcing were held as being this is going to deliver real cost savings, I'm not convinced that anyone ever really believed that, or certainly believes it now. And I don't think the rationale for doing a traditional outsourcing is cost saving anymore. I think it's more around I can't be bothered to do it, or I think you might just do it better, or it's just not core activity. Cloud is an area where we see huge cost savings because you're not having to invest in the technology and infrastructure to support it, and of course you're sharing it with lots of other customers, so because you're sharing it, the individual cost to you as a user is much less.
When it comes to termination, are there any differences between cloud services and outsourcing?
Well, I mean, I think traditionally they've been dealt with differently, and this is one area that we've always said to our clients, you absolutely have to structure and look at exit in the same way as you would in a traditional outsourcing model. So typically you would have seen very little in a cloud contract. In the early days, some of those had very little detail around exit, and we always say, no, you must look at this in the way that you would look at it in a traditional IT outsourcing. You must have exit provisions in there, you must have detailed provisions around how you get access to your data, any obligations on the service provider to transfer it back to you, what are the costs associated with that. All of that is a very important part of a cloud service to ensure that you don't find yourself locked into it and unable to move because actually you haven't got access to your data.
And how about service levels? I remember in outsourcing the whole issue of service levels was really important. Best description of outsourcing was I give you my heart and ask you to pump it for me. I'm very keen how well you do that. What about cloud?
Yeah, and I think again looking at the traditional outsourcing model, you tend to see much more bespoke service levels associated with the particular service because there's much more tailoring of the service, I think, in a traditional outsourcing. Not always true that, but generally you see much more tailoring of the service. And of course you don't in cloud because again it's all around standardization. This is my solution, this is my stack of technology, this is what I'm giving you, this is what you're getting, you're not getting anything else. And it's the same sort of approach in service level, so it tends to be very standard around an availability measure. At one time you didn't get anything, so the first providers of cloud didn't offer anything around service levels. That's changing as people are putting more critical systems into the cloud and they're signing up to longer periods. But you still see a lot of vagueness and willingness around the service levels, and it's quite hard to understand exactly what the commitment is. And I think there's lots of woolly language that maybe doesn't give you quite as precise a qualitative measure around performance as you might get in a traditional deal.
So you're sitting at your desk as a general counsel one Monday morning and your chief exec and head of IT roll in and say, I'm very excited, I've got this fantastic, cheap, effective cloud service we're going to sign up tomorrow. What are the key issues you're going to raise for your client there?
So I've already mentioned some of the key things, thinking about what data is going into the solution, making sure that you're compliant with the new data protection regulations, potentially therefore doing some kind of privacy impact assessment against the use of that solution. All of those things are going to be important. Making sure that you've got adequate exit provisions, as I've just said again, really focusing on all of that. But I think the biggest thing in cloud, and this is where I think people go wrong, is understanding what the technology is. In the old world of a traditional IT outsourcing or any kind of outsourcing, you'd have a long, convoluted service description. People would be spending a lot of time going over it. They'd understand, and they'd have a lot of input and control into how that service was delivered in a traditional outsourcing world. That doesn't happen in cloud, and people sign up and buy these services without really understanding what the service is, how it's constituted, where the servers are, in whose data centre, what's the structure of a subcontracting supply chain model behind that service. And if you don't do that, you can't make any assessment about risk. And like everything, and cloud is probably even more so, this is about managing risk and understanding the risk you're taking. If you don't understand the solution you're buying, you won't be able to do that. I think there's some great things about cloud. I don't think there's anything to be too fearful of, but you do have to understand what you're buying, which in other commercial contracts, David Lowe will kill me, you might not need to.
Well, let's all hope our clouds all have silver linings. Thank you very much, Sally.
Oh, thank you, Michael.